The Oscars. The biggest night in Hollywood, millions watching from every corner of the world, and Jimmy Kimmel was midway through his opening monologue when a producer slipped up beside him with a phone and a look that said something had just happened. What had happened was this. Donald Trump, sitting somewhere watching the Academy Awards, had posted a review. Kimmel read it to the room. "I just got a review. Has there ever been a worse host than Jimmy Kimmel at the Oscars?" His opening was that of a less-than-average person trying too hard to be something which he is not and never can be. Get rid of Kimmel and perhaps replace him with another washed-up but cheap ABC talent, George Stephanopoulos. He would make everybody on stage look bigger, stronger, and more glamorous. Make America great again. He looked up. The room, Emma Stone, Bradley Cooper, the full assembled galaxy of Hollywood royalty, stared back at him. See if you can guess which former president just posted that on Truth Social. Anyone? The audience laughed before the question finished. "Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for watching." He paused. "I'm surprised you're still... Isn't it past your jail time?" The Dolby Theater came apart. That was the moment. For a man who had built his entire political identity on controlling attention, on being the loudest presence in any room, Trump had just handed the microphone to the person he was attacking on the biggest broadcast of the year, and Kimmel had aimed it directly back at him in front of the entire planet. The next morning, every outlet ran the same headline: "President watches Oscars, gets roasted by host live on stage." Kimmel wasn't finished. The night after the Oscars, he walked out to his desk with the particular energy of a man who has been given more material than he can reasonably use and intends to use all of it. According to a new poll from YouGov, which is a serious polling site, or they were before this, I am more popular than the President of the United States. The audience cheered. He raised a hand. "Considering I'm not a convicted felon, a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and I've never paid off a porn star or sent a team of goons into a park to pull an old lady away from her grandchildren, I feel like my rating should maybe be higher than it is at this point." He let a beat pass. "Finding a toenail in your salad has a 7-point lead over Donald Trump." That line traveled instantly. By morning, it had been captioned, clipped, and shared in a dozen languages across every platform. Not because it was cruel, but because the specific image of it, the calibrated absurdity, was the precise instrument for what it was describing. Trump saw it. Trump responded. The White House, the actual White House, with its press office and official letterhead and the full institutional weight of the executive branch, released a statement. It read, in part, "Jimmy Kimmel prays every night to garner a fraction of the support to keep his show on air after ratings dropped 64% last week. Sad." Kimmel read this on air the following night with the expression of a man opening a present he already knew was inside the box. The White House, the actual White House, issued an official statement attacking a late-night comedian's TV ratings. He let the sentence sit. The President of the United States was so rattled by a joke that he had his staff write a press release about Nielsen numbers. Nobody in the studio laughed at that part. They applauded. While Kimmel was holding the mirror up at the Oscars, Stephen Colbert was holding it up from a different angle. And what he found on his end was a backhoe. Trump had been talking about building a ballroom at the White House. A proper ballroom, he explained, because the White House didn't have one. And when foreign leaders came to dinner, they had to use tents on the lawn. And if it rained, that was a wipeout. And he had been with the architects, and it was going to be incredible. And there would be drinks, cocktails, everything on this floor. And then they would say, "Welcome to dinner." And you would walk into a ballroom, the likes of which, he felt confident about this, would not be topped. He had also specifically promised on the record that the construction would not touch the existing building. It won't interfere with the current building. It'll be near it, but not touching it. And it pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of. Colbert showed the clip, then showed what happened next. Yesterday, as part of his White House ballroom project, he sent out a backhoe to rip off a chunk of the East Wing. Colbert looked at the camera. "We are not giving him the security deposit back." The audience laughed because Colbert's genius is exactly that. He makes the room laugh at the absurdity before the full weight of what he's describing settles in. By the time the laughter fades, the thing is already sitting in the room with everyone, unavoidable. At this point, should we even believe this ends up being a ballroom? It could just as easily end up being a combination Pizza Hut Taco Bell. He paused. Someone in his administration is clearly smart enough to know how bad this looks, because the Treasury Department, right next door, has now told its employees not to share photos of the construction. Another pause. That's not generally something you instruct when you're proud of what's going on. Hey guys, no photos at my wedding, and it's not because I'm marrying a body pillow of Mariah Carey. But here is where both men shifted, from comedy to something with an edge underneath it. Because while Trump was defending his ballroom plans and posting about TV ratings, there was a question nobody in official Washington seemed willing to ask loudly or persistently, and Kimmel asked it. You know what else is sad? The President of the United States has a lower approval rating than Diddy and diarrhea. He let the laugh crest. If he's looking to improve his numbers, I have an idea. Release the Epstein files. The crowd erupted, not just because it was funny, because it was the thing. 77% of Americans want the Epstein files released, Kimmel continued, but 100% of our American president does not want them released. Trump's treating these files like the grumpy old neighbor on Halloween. He turns off all the lights and hopes the trick-or-treaters assume nobody's home. The Kimmel connected the dots. Why are we building a $200 million ballroom at the White House? Is it possible he's doing it intentionally? So we're talking about that instead of the Epstein list by the time he's out of office? The laughter stopped. The room sat with it. Because suddenly the ballroom wasn't funny anymore. It was something else. The moment that nobody could laugh off came when a CNN reporter asked Trump directly whether he would pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's convicted accomplice, currently serving 20 years for child sex trafficking. The same man who has a rapid, certain, emphatic opinion about everything looked at the camera and said, "Who are we talking about?" When reminded, he said he hadn't heard the name in so long. He said he'd have to take a look. He said he had a lot of people asking him for pardons. He mentioned, unprompted, that Puff Daddy had asked him for a pardon. When the reporter specified that Maxwell had been convicted of child sex trafficking, Trump said he'd have to ask DOJ. Kimmel watched the clip at his desk. Trump, on everything, instantly, suddenly cannot remember Ghislaine Maxwell's name. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. Then came the cancellation attempt. Trump, reportedly furious about the ongoing coverage, had pushed for ABC to pull Kimmel's show. The threats were explicit. The administration signaled that broadcast licenses were not untouchable, that there were hard ways and easy ways. The language, Colbert noted, was lifted almost directly from a mob movie. "That's right out of Goodfellas," Colbert said. "A mafioso walking into a bar. Nice place you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it." Disney ultimately kept the show. And, in the detail that Colbert delivered with barely concealed delight, among the voices objecting to the administration's threat was Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, Colbert said, letting the name sit in the air. Ted Cruz was defending Jimmy Kimmel because Trump's threats crossed a line that even Republicans couldn't ignore. When Kimmel appeared on Colbert's show shortly after, the two men sat across from each other and one of them asked the question that wasn't a joke at all. "Did you ever think the President of the United States would be out there celebrating your unemployment?" Kimmel shook his head, quietly, the way a man speaks when he means what he's saying. "I never imagined we'd have a president like this, and I hope we don't ever have another president like this again." He looked at the camera. "I never even imagined there would be a situation in which the president of this country was celebrating hundreds of Americans losing their jobs, somebody who took pleasure in that. That is the absolute opposite of what a leader of this country is supposed to be." The studio went still, so here is what Kimmel and Colbert did that nobody else managed to do. They took Trump's own words, his posts, his speeches, his promises, his deflections, his obsessions with ballrooms and ratings and revenge, and they held them up, one at a time, in front of the largest possible audiences, and they let the material speak. Kimmel read the Truth Social rant at the Oscars because he understood that the most effective thing you can do with a man who craves attention is reflect his own attention seeking back at him in a format he can't control. Colbert showed the clip of the promise, then showed the backhoe, because the gap between the two is funnier and more devastating than anything a writer could construct. And together, they returned to the same question, night after night, in different registers and from different angles. Not because they were angry, though they were, but because the question was real and the answer mattered, and nobody else in a position to be heard was asking it. Why won't he release the files? The ballroom kept getting built. The statement from the White House kept arriving. The name Ghislaine Maxwell kept being forgotten on cue. And every night, the receipts kept getting read out loud. Subscribe if you believe comedy is the last honest news on television.